We found the skeleton. What we want to do is try and verify who that skeleton might be.
They said his bones were gone, scattered in a river, erased by time, condemned by victors. For over 500 years, the final resting place of England's most divisive king remained a ghost story. Until 2012, when a team of archaeologists dug beneath an ordinary car park in Leicester. What they found changed history. A twisted spine, a skull cleaved by swords, and within that broken skeleton, a story no crown could contain. Because hidden in his DNA was a secret powerful enough to question the very idea of royal blood. For centuries, kings rewrote history with quills. Now, science rewrites it with genomes. Every cell carries a record no historian can alter, a biological archive that survives when empires collapse. And from that archive, a king rose again, to tell a truth the world was never meant to hear. His name was Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England. Killed in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth Field, his story was twisted by the victors into one of cruelty and deformity. A hunchbacked tyrant, a murderer of princes, a villain so despised that even death refused to honor him. But the bones buried beneath Leicester told a different story, one that science, not Shakespeare, would reveal. When archaeologists uncovered that grave, they didn't just find a monarch. They unearthed the most controversial genetic evidence in royal history. Because in every fragment of his skeleton, every cell of decayed bone lay a confession written in DNA, one that could unravel the myth of divine right and expose a dynasty built on deception. This isn't just the story of a lost king. It's the story of how truth survived 5 centuries underground, waiting for science to dig it up. Before we continue, subscribe to Root and Relic, where we unearth the forgotten truths of our past and reveal what the blood, the bones, and the earth have never stopped trying to tell us. For more than 5 centuries, no one knew where England's last Plantagenet lay. Chroniclers wrote that after the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, Richard's body was stripped, humiliated, and buried without ceremony in the Greyfriars Priory at Leicester. Then came the Reformation. The friary was demolished, its stones scattered, its gardens paved over. The king's resting place slipped from memory into legend. By the 1800s, pamphlets claimed his bones had been dumped into the River Soar, as if even death had rejected him. But in 2012, historian Philippa Langley followed a hunch that defied centuries of rumor. Using 15th century maps and ground-penetrating radar, she traced the lost monastery beneath a municipal car park. Archaeologists from the University of Leicester Archaeological Services marked out a rectangle between yellow parking lines, drilling through layers of asphalt to expose medieval soil. Every centimeter was documented. Volunteers from the Richard III Society cataloged broken tiles, coffin nails, pottery shards, each artifact a heartbeat from the past. Then, on the 3rd day, a curved spine appeared in the clay. A whisper rippled through the trench. This could be him. Within hours, the media descended. The skeleton was that of a man in his early 30s, battle-scarred, spine twisted in an S-curve, skull cleaved by multiple blows. Archaeologists had unearthed what rumor had buried for 500 years, but bones alone could not silence doubt. History demanded proof, and only DNA could deliver it. Ancient DNA is fragile, splintered by heat, moisture, and time. Scientists estimate that fewer than 1% of medieval skeletons preserve readable genetic material. Yet inside a molar and thigh bone from the Leicester remains, Dr. Turi King's team discovered fragments still intact, microscopic codes capable of rewriting royal history. Every step unfolded in a sealed, clean laboratory, where contamination could destroy centuries of evidence. Researchers worked in positive pressure suits. Scalpels and drills were sterilized under ultraviolet light. Even a stray fingerprint could falsify the genome, so they extracted the powder in a sterile cabinet, freezing it instantly at 80 degrees Celsius. To ensure certainty, the data was sequenced twice, once in Leicester, again at Tartu University in Estonia. Both runs produced the same result. They targeted 2 genetic signatures that endure through generations: mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers, and the Y chromosome, passed from fathers to sons. Genealogists traced Richard's sister Anne of York through 19 generations to 2 living relatives: Michael Ibsen, a London cabinet maker, and Wendy Duldig, a Canadian genealogist. When the results arrived, the match was exact. The mitochondrial sequence from the skeleton and from the living descendants was identical, a 1 in millions coincidence. In February 2013, the University of Leicester declared, Beyond any reasonable doubt, the bones belonged to King Richard III. Around the world, headlines celebrated the triumph of science over myth. But the story was only half told, because when the team turned to the Y chromosome, the royal line of fathers and sons, the data exposed a secret powerful enough to fracture the English crown itself. The Y chromosome should have been simple. It passes almost unchanged from father to son, the unbroken thread of dynasties. But when researchers compared Richard III's Y chromosome to those of living male line descendants of Edward III, the data refused to obey the crown. The sequences weren't merely different, they belonged to entirely separate haplogroups. Richard carried haplogroup GP287. His supposed male cousins carried I2b. That meant only one thing. Somewhere between Edward III and Richard III, a royal father was not the father he claimed to be. In genetic terms, a false paternity event. In royal terms, treason by blood. If the break occurred early, perhaps with John of Gaunt, ancestor of the Lancastrian branch, the legitimacy of the Tudors, and every monarch descending from them could be called into question. If later, the flaw might lie not with kings, but with the modern family tested. Either way, the illusion of divine purity was shattered. When the findings reached the press in late 2014, the world reeled. The Guardian called it a DNA time bomb beneath the monarchy. Buckingham Palace offered no comment, but historians whispered what others dared not. If one hidden affair could fracture a line of succession, what else might the genome of England conceal? The revelation didn't dethrone anyone, but it dethroned the idea of perfection. Wars had been fought, brothers executed, empires forged on the sanctity of blood. And now, centuries later, DNA had proven that blood itself could lie. If a single strand of DNA could unravel centuries of royal power, would you still believe in the divine right of kings? Tell me what you think in the comments. Beyond scandal, the science itself was revolutionary. Richard III's genome became the oldest complete royal genome ever sequenced, published in Nature Communications, 2014. Radiocarbon dating placed his death between 1450 and 1540 CE, perfectly framing the Battle of Bosworth. But his bones held more than a date. They held a diary. Through isotopic analysis of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and strontium, scientists read the chemistry of his life. His teeth revealed a noble childhood in Yorkshire and the East Midlands, his movements mirroring his family's fortunes. The oxygen isotopes in his enamel matched the rivers and rainwater of those regions, confirming the chronicles. By adulthood, his diet changed drastically. The nitrogen and carbon signatures screamed privilege. Meats of swan, crane, and venison, fish imported from the North Sea. Wine richer than most men would ever taste. Researchers estimated that he consumed the equivalent of a bottle of wine per day in his final years. Even his bones contained trace metals from gilded tableware, a literal imprint of kingship. The scoliosis that defined his legend was precisely measured, a 70 to 80 degree spinal curvature, raising one shoulder but still leaving him agile. Muscle markings proved he trained for combat. He stood about 5 feet 8 inches tall, reduced to 5 feet 5 after curvature. DNA phenotyping identified blue eyes and blonde-brown hair, matching early portraits painted before Tudor propaganda darkened his image. Every test peeled away a layer of myth. The monster of the stage dissolved, replaced by a living man. Disciplined, intelligent, flawed, and fiercely human. For the first time in half a millennium, the bones spoke not through rumor, but through reason. For 5 centuries, Richard III was remembered not as a king, but as a curse, a deformed tyrant, a villain who murdered children, a symbol of ambition twisted into evil, immortalized by Shakespeare, whose patron just happened to be the granddaughter of Richard's enemy. But bones tell a cleaner truth. The curve in his spine wasn't a divine punishment. It was adolescent-onset scoliosis, not visible until his teens. It would have raised one shoulder, shortened his height, but left him mobile, strong, and capable of leading men into battle. His vertebrae carried thick muscle ridges, evidence of armor, of war horses, of years spent wielding steel. This was no misshapen coward. This was a trained warrior. Then came his final day at Bosworth Field, August 22nd of 1485. The forensic team cataloged 11 wounds, 9 to the skull. 2 were instantly fatal. One blade cleaving through the base of the skull, another slicing deep across the crown. Several smaller cuts traced a story of chaos, enemies closing in as his helmet was torn away, leaving him exposed. Microscopic bone splinters showed where weapons struck from behind, where one blade shattered on impact. After death, humiliation followed. His body was stripped naked, thrown over a horse, and paraded for crowds to jeer. Yet every mark on his skeleton spoke of defiance, not fear. He didn't crawl, he fought. He died surrounded, betrayed by fortune, not by cowardice. Shakespeare wrote him crooked in body and soul. Science wrote him straight, a man reshaped by war, not wickedness. The monster was propaganda. The man was proof. In March 2015, Leicester became the stage for something the world had never seen. A medieval king receiving a second funeral, watched by the nation he once ruled. More than 35,000 people lined the streets as a horse-drawn hearse carried a simple oak coffin, crafted by Michael Ibsen, Richard's modern descendant. It was a gesture of poetic symmetry. The DNA that proved his identity now built his casket. The cortege paused at Bosworth Field, where soil from the battlefield was placed inside the coffin. Choirs sang 15th-century hymns as sunlight broke through the cathedral glass. Inside, historians, clergy, and royalty stood side by side while Archbishop Justin Welby spoke. In the bones of a king, we find the humility of mortality. For a nation raised on Tudor propaganda, the moment felt like closure. Richard III was no longer the villain in verse, nor the ghost beneath a car park. He was a man restored to history, imperfect, proven, forgiven. But beneath the solemn hymns lingered irony. The same DNA that returned him to the throne of memory had also revealed a fracture in the royal bloodline, a scientific ghost that still haunts the genealogy of kings. That day, England buried its last Plantagenet and exhumed a deeper question. If truth can outlive power for 500 years, what else still sleeps beneath our feet, waiting for science to wake it? The discovery beneath Leicester's asphalt didn't just rewrite one man's story. It rewrote the rules of history itself. Richard III's genome became the spark that lit an entire scientific revolution. Before him, archaeology relied on artifacts, chronicles, and guesswork. After him, ancient DNA became a new language, one capable of speaking across millennia. Within 3 years, the same sequencing methods exposed the face of Cheddar Man, 2018, Britain's oldest known skeleton, revealing that the first Britons had dark skin and blue eyes, overturning centuries of assumption. By 2020, geneticists had traced Viking migrations, proved that the Romanovs were truly murdered in Ekaterinburg, and mapped the genomes of Ice Age hunters who once roamed the tundra of Siberia. Projects in Greenland, Peru, and Egypt began pulling genomes from mummies, glacier corpses, and royal tombs. What began as one medieval king's rediscovery evolved into a global discipline, bioarchaeology, the fusion of history, chemistry, and genetics. Universities opened entire departments devoted to it. Museums redesigned exhibits to include the molecular past. Even public interest shifted. Millions mailed saliva to ancestry companies, searching for echoes of forgotten empires in their own blood. But Richard's case remains singular. Because while most DNA studies add knowledge, his added doubt. It forced the world to confront a dangerous truth, that the myths of purity, of divine lineage, of perfect inheritance are stories, not science. The Plantagenet bloodline, once thought unbroken, turned out as human as any other, full of mistakes, desires, and secrets buried under crowns. And in that admission lay something oddly beautiful, a reminder that even kings cannot edit the past forever. From a forgotten grave beneath a parking lot, a king rose to challenge 5 centuries of myth. His bones spoke louder than propaganda. His DNA shattered the illusion of unbroken blood, and his face, reconstructed from data, not rumor, looked out at a world finally ready to see him as he was. Because in the end, truth is older than monarchy. It survives wars, rewrites, and lies. It sleeps in bones until science wakes it. Richard III's story is not about a king found. It's about what we find when evidence defies legend, and when data restores dignity. His skeleton reminded us that history isn't carved in marble. It's coded in flesh. If this story made you question what we think we know about power, tap like, share this with someone who loves hidden history, and subscribe to Root and Relic, where every grave, every genome, and every forgotten name still has something left to say.